Hi, everybody. I am Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centers, and your host for today's closing session of the third edition of the annual Cosmic Conference. This year, over 3.5 weeks, I can't believe they're already over, we discussed the topic of employee experience. We wanted to understand how we can design better employee experience, more engaging employee experiences, and we explored this topic through a variety of lenses. I believe this is session number 16, if I'm not mistaken. We spoke about everything from imprintable moments to internal comms, to intranets, to office design, to reconnecting with your purpose and values, to designing flexible work at scale. I mean, you name it, we talked about it. As today is our last session, I really want to take a minute to thank everybody who contributed to the conference, whether it be the Cosmic Centers team or all of the incredible thought leaders and academics and experts and managers who joined me and shared their experiences and perspectives, not least of which is Breeze, who's joining us here today and who I'll introduce in a minute. Of course, if you've missed any or many of the sessions that we had, you can still rewatch them forever on our website. We'll put the link in the comments. And if you happen to be around this Friday afternoon or morning, if you're in, the west side of the globe, then please show us some love, give the video a like, tell us where you're joining us from, and do ask us questions. We look forward to answering them. Today's guest is Breeze Dong. She's an Enterprise Agile Coach at Roche Pharma International. She is an executive and business coach currently serving as I'm rereading the same sentence. This is amazing. As an Enterprise Agile Coach in the pharmaceutical industry, she is passionate about integrating her various facets of business insights with the art of paradigm shift in complex systems. Meanwhile, she follows her flow of energy to bring more integral organizational practices in leadership development, in coaching, and in organizational development. She aspires to create space for authentic, mindful, and purposeful organizations. She has a master's in industrial engineering and over a decade of experience in various leadership roles in Fortune 100 companies, currently based in Switzerland. Breeze, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Marilyn, for inviting me.
When I first heard what you do, I thought we must talk about it. And by the way, we should take a minute to thank Miriam Hadness here for making the introduction. I remember asking her, do you know someone who is capable of managing change at a scale that I couldn't even begin to imagine? And she said, I have the right person for you. And she made the introduction. And so what we want to talk about today is really how within your practice, and particularly in your role at Roche, how you use practices like human-centered design, systems thinking in order to create engagement and transformation at scale. I mean, that's no easy feat, and it's just so incredible to see how such a small group of people can impact such a large organization. So maybe we just start off with asking you to tell us a bit, Breeze, about what is your role as a transformation and enterprise agile coach?
Yeah, for sure. And first of all, really happy to be here and so encouraged to hear such insights and wisdom, shared in this platform. So I must set a disclaimer, here. It's not like me or such small group having so great impact. I guess it's really catalyzing, me as a coach, and also my colleagues, fellow coaches, catalyzing the energy of the collective system, collective wisdom, and collective intelligence. Right. So to start with, my role as an enterprise agile coach in Roche is really just to support the transformation journey, across over 140 countries, and catalyzing using really systems approach to hold the whole and to maybe invite what's coming next, what's futuristic, and invite that to life. So my role generally is supporting this journey and in many aspects that you already named, in organizational development, etc., leadership development for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so talk to us a little bit more about, how do you break down an organization into a system? When I have discussed how much systems thinking is a big part of your approach. break it down for us. Like, how do you look at the organization from that point of view? You're talking about being a catalyst. I really love that, because in the end, it's about igniting every individual and every leader in order to, to inspire them to create the change that is needed. But how do you tangibly kind of look at the organization as a system?
That's a beautiful question. I mean, I guess as starting to address this question, it's also quite important to understand why do we work on any change, and what's the purpose of going on this journey. And actually, then once the purpose is clear, it's really then the how, to see the system as a living organism, and
Mhm.
then support sort of the journey. And in our case, in Roche, the why for me is like connects with my heart very closely, is like, you know providing more benefits for patients and for the healthcare ecosystem at lower cost. So this is something that supports me in seeing this is the meaning of the work. And then as we are embarking on the journey, of course, Roche has, as a whole group, Roche has 100,000 employees, and my unit in the commercial side has 14,000. And even just 14,000 is not a small number. And exactly, you touched the point of how do we tangibly view this as a system and to work on it. And in my practice, it is indeed like holding this question daily, to zoom in and zoom out, and seeing the different perspective, different parts of the organizations, um, and using system thinking theory, sort of just to remind ourselves to allow the emergence in the change process, and to address that. So I don't want to kind of delve too deep in the rabbit hole, but we can certainly sort of explore some of the aspects of how do we actually work on this. And sometimes, just yesterday, I was in a face-to-face workshop, and we used this analogy of a soup of emergence. So, right. So the thing is, understanding a complex system, it's fascinating for me, because it is not linear. It is not a simple A to B sort of solution. And that's also why we, at least in my environment, we rarely sort of talk so much about, say, change management. But what
Mhm.
what we say is, it's really with the purpose, the North Star in mind. How do we actually view the system as a living system of all the elements that's in play, and then nudging and influencing the certain elements, hopefully also elements that could create more exponential impact to go
Mhm.
to the direction that we want to go.
And so when you talk about these elements, you're talking about leaders, you're talking about processes. What specifically do you try to influence in the organization?
Yeah. Well, in this journey, for sure, it's about the leaders, about the leadership mind, about the mindset. It's about structures, governance, and processes. It's also about, like, I guess, in a way, it's both the being and the doing. So I guess, if I kind of really think about what's there, it's both the being side of understanding the process, understanding the purpose of the mindset of own identity, the leadership qualities, but also the doing, right? So the governance, the tools, the tech, so the technical foundations, right? And both of them really need to work, like really need to work together. Often cases, the reality is, it's often cases not so seamless. And I guess that's also where we find the areas to work on, right?
I think that's really incredible, actually. In my work, in many ways, I always say I'm a holistic thinker, because in the field of work that we're in, which is around helping leaders kind of rethink work and the workplace, and and improve the environment in which employees exist in order to enable them to do their best work. Sometimes people come and say, but don't you do too much? Because if you look at the different areas, like if I sent you our company presentation, you'd see that we do everything from org structure to processes to the tools to coaching to skills to culture to rituals. And it's a lot more common in our industry that people kind of will focus on one thing. And my answer is often, and I resonate a lot with your framing of it, but it's often that you can't change an organization by changing one thing, because all of these things are interrelated and interconnected. The metaphor I often use is talking about, for example, a cellular network, where if you want to upgrade to 5G, it's not sufficient to upgrade one antenna. It won't work that way, right?
Mhm.
And I really appreciate actually people who are able to hold this complex map in their minds and understand these like second order effects of like, well, if we change this but we don't change that, these things are interrelated and they have to operate
Mm,
with one another, and to kind of be able to project the organic evolution, as you called it, of the impact of something that we do, and how it's going to propagate
mm.
through the organization. Your team is 16 people, and you do this for 14,000 people. What would you say is like your secret sauce? What's your ingredient to be able to scale, and let's say press on the right levers, as you were saying earlier?
Yeah. Well, that I guess that's really a area that we, the 60 people, we also reflect on a lot.
Mm,
And by the way, like we are in the headquarters, so the 16 people, and in the countries we have really more than around 140 countries. So we also have colleagues in the country, but we are not like a hierarchical sort of organization. It's really more like a community. I mean, if you ask me if I would use one word, it would be catalyzing. But one word is actually not enough to really sort of comprehend the breadth of the work and the depth of the work we do. System thinking is so essential to everything that we do. And precisely because, despite that these 16 people have great talents, very different, very diverse, we know we are not good. We won't be able to, like, physically won't be able to do all these areas of work, right? So then partnering and catalyzing the various pockets of where passion lies, where also there is energy. That's really perhaps the secret sauce, how we, like, in a way, energize the organization. And like, I very much resonate with what you shared of, like, it sounds like you're doing everything. When people ask me about my team, and I really love the setting at the moment, is that we really do need to address multifaceted of things, right? So when we start the transformation, we were talking about agile principles, when we talk about teal, when we talk about leadership development, and then and we talk about customer centricity with digital means. And as the journey goes on, like, really naturally we start to also realize, oh, all the foundational factors, like, performance management, right? People's career development, the way we organize internally, how do we collaborate, and how do we really understand the actual networks that are in place in the organization, right? And do we understand the clusters of networks that are like dynamically evolving? So all these actually emerge along the journey. And what we do essentially is really tuning in to what's happening in the moment, holding the system's lens, and also holding this. I love the word holistic lens. Is holding this lightly, like, not really rigidly, but holding this lightly, tuning in very much of what's happening, and especially also from our customers, the patients that we serve, right? And see, so what areas do we want to nudge a bit more, right? And then we use ways to sort of connect and partner with our colleagues, so that we collectively we start to unlock the potential in the organization.
Yeah, I think that's really incredible. Tala says it sounds like Breeze has the coolest job, and I couldn't agree more. And I think, to me, this immediately, points me in the direction of perhaps a visionary leader and a strong sense of purpose, right? Like, at least when I look at the kinds of people that make our best clients, it does take a leader who is already convinced of the value of this approach, that doesn't need me to sell them the magic sauce. They understand that this is necessary. They just need someone who can execute for them. And it sounds like that's what you guys have, because otherwise, it's very, if leadership wasn't aligned with this approach, then politics, hierarchy, all of these things would get in the way really fast. Talk to me a little bit about that. And we do have a question also from the audience. I remember you telling me a little bit more about the purpose of Roche and how you've chosen a strategy that may not be necessarily to focus on the most profitable segment in medical care, but that it's really something that's very close to your heart as an organization, in diagnostics and so on. And so, talk to us a little bit about that combination of a strong purpose and the kind of leadership that creates space for this approach.
Ah, beautiful. Yeah. I remember definitely the story that I mentioned, and that was an article from The Economist. I read, I think, probably 2 years back. So, and the story there is basically about, like, this is a peculiar company that actually held the vision of personalized healthcare so dear that 2 decades ago that Roche decided to acquire from diagnosis. And diagnosis as a, like, medical devices and diagnosis is margin is much lower, right, compared to the pharma at that time. And just holding that vision over 2 decades, like having that purposeful approach was what the Economist magazine was writing about, that this is a very interesting company. Yeah. And coming back to the topic, when you just mentioned the leadership aspect, what I feel very much inspired by the Roche culture is really the space of a long-term of long-term development, long-term benefit for patients. And you might know that Roche is a public trading company. It is 125 years already this year. And actually, 51% of the stocks are still owned by the family. Perhaps thanks to that, that actually what I observe of many of the decisions, even before I joined Roche, was that there seemed to be really the strong conviction, the strong passion for patients and for the healthcare industry that's behind many of the decisions, right? And of course, Roche is a commercial company, right? So we're not a charity. So we do talk about triple win. So the triple win is the healthcare ecosystem, the patients, and Roche. So we do hold this transformation that we are working on, we hold the belief that if we contribute to the ecosystem, to the broader motivation for benefiting the whole, we will also not only survive, but also thrive. So this is what I feel personally very, very connected, that this mindset and the value that is vast, and not really sort of a small kind of self-interest focus, right? And this quality, I would say I'm very much inspired by, that many of the leaders that I encounter in Roche do hold such a broad perspective of healthcare ecosystem, and that perhaps is really something that supported such work to emerge in today's world.
Absolutely. Question here from the audience as well. Karma's asking, about whether you could share some of the practices that you do perhaps during an onboarding process, or any rituals that you have in the organization that speaks specifically to that alignment with the purpose.
Ah, that's really beautiful. Um, What for sure. I mean, in terms of the onboarding process, and Roche has embraced, to my knowledge, over 6 years, the leadership, the leadership circle profile. Some of you might already know about this, and this as an onboarding, many of the leaders, well, actually, I would say we probably have done over 7,000 leadership circle profiles for the leaders globally, and in this path, it actually allows you to connect deeply with your identity, with and explore your purpose, and look into your sort of reactive creative side, and start with sort of addressing how we could be more sort of coming towards the creative. And this whole system is developed based on the adult development theory, so the integral theory. And this is also what many of the elements actually ties together in the integral theory. If you're familiar, if you're like in, I guess in psychology, in the integral theory basically really talks about the sort of not a egocentric mindset, but really the word integral is like kind of connecting with your sort of with your purpose, with even your spirituality, perhaps, in like developing as a whole. And the probably many of you read the Frederic Laloux's book Reinventing Organization, and the teal precisely like links with the integral theory at that level, that we broaden our perspective from the individual self-interest to community, to sort of broader perspective ecosystem, and also just include the sort of really include the broader aspects. I hope
Wow.
that sort of answers the question, because
It
there are
does.
many practices. And I think this one is probably the most adopted in terms of the onboarding and the mindset piece. Yeah.
That's really incredible. And I think this again, like for me, it sits with that organic view almost of a fractal, like from the biggest to from the smallest to the largest element, everything impacting each other. There's a pattern from the individual to the organization to, the ecosystem and the communities that you impact through the work that you do there. And I think that's a really beautiful perspective to say, you bring your individuality and yourself to this space. You connect through your own purpose, but also through the organizational purpose, and you impact the world around you. On Miriam Hadness's podcast, you spoke also about this idea of heart connection that helps individuals to relate to each other, but also to the overall organizational purpose. I wonder if you could, just speak a little bit towards what heart connection is to you. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about how, you earlier you said the being and the doing, but how every person brings their full self to the organization.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, heart connection. In a way, it is something that I feel as a like as an OD practitioner. I just gained the experience in the years that transformation won't happen unless you touch the heart. And in fact, the wisdom or ancient wisdom or today or modern wisdom actually talk about head, heart, and gut. That when these are in alignment, actually transformation can happen. So it is really my deep belief that this is work not on the superficial or linear level. It is actually about, first of all, personal transformation, right? And then if we can open our hearts to connect with this purpose, to connect our individual purpose with the organization's sort of direction and purpose, and then we are in synchronization, like or alignment. Yeah, and this is how I would like to operate, and this is also what often cases I experience during some inspiring sort of work within Roche, that when leaders actually open up with the heart connections, they they are very influential in that way, because you touch people in a deeper dimension. right? So, last time when I was talking to Miriam, we were actually talking about the corporate world, and a lot of people may name the corporate almost like a negative sort of tone, right? And in a way, I feel it would be quite sad, because I mean the world consists of a lot of corporates still, right? And how like how could we bring more of such connections in the corporate world, and also through the ecosystem, to bring such ways of connection to the world? I feel this is a very meaningful work to do. I yeah, so that's really where that comes from.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there. And also, I think, like, I mean, I've spent my share of my time in the startup world, but I've also spent time in the corporate world. And I think that there is a scale and an impact that the corporate world can have through its resources, its footprint, um, its brands, because brands matter too, that small startups can't have. And so to always consider corporate as like the big evil thing there, instead of, as you say, thinking about it as a tool for impact at a scale that isn't accessible otherwise, I think would be a real shame. The other day with Joe Santos, we were in fact talking about, on the one hand, the impact of place on firms. So we were talking about, because in the last few months since the pandemic, we starting to think of organizations as completely dematerialized, away from the ground, the firm ground that they stand on. And remote work has made us have this very universal discussion around work, which is very, in my view, and I share that view with Joe, not relevant, because we don't like, not every country is the same, not every geography is the same, not every history or culture is the same. And by removing the material space in which we work, we've kind of made it sound like it was, but the truth is it's not. And where I come from and where you come from matters. And also the impact of the firm on the place around it, which is that
Mhm.
firms are in communities. Whether we realize it or not, we employ, especially large corporations that might employ thousands of people in the same city. We have a duty of, like, to care and to reflect on how we impact the world around us.
Mhm.
um, and I wonder if you can speak a little bit, maybe, of your own personal story about what of your culture and your individuality do you feel that you bring to this role? What are, I always talk about, like, oh, I come from Lebanon, and so this is why I think in this way, or this, my mother was like that, and therefore I'm like this. I feel very close to how my history and the place where I'm from impact who I am in the world today. Just a
Mhm.
personal question for you. I'd love to hear how you bring your own history into it.
Sure. Yeah, love to share that. I come from China. I was born and grew up in China. And I was definitely influenced by the Taoism and Buddhism philosophies in from China. And what I definitely noticed, there are two things that actually um, help me to do my work, and I hope also that inspire others as well. One element is about the almost like this holistic view. So in the Taoism, and you might be familiar with some sort of traditional Chinese medicine, and how we look at body as a whole, and how we look at meridian lines and acupuncture points, and this sort of being being born into this environment and philosophy gave me a natural sense that I would like to see the whole, right? And also in that element, there is a very strong sort of, especially in Buddhism philosophy, this very strong compassion. And actually, it's compassion beyond borders. It's not compassion to a certain element, it's self and the system, and actually with all that is there. And this vast motivation helps me a lot in my role. And I actually talk about the system thinking and compassion a lot in my environment, which we deal with very much complexity, as you can imagine, right? Despite I talk how much sort of like I might have described the world almost like utopia because I'm inherently an optimistic person. I must say there are also pain points and etc. But this holding the whole and also holding the compassion for self and the system, it's very much I hope to bring this to this work, right? And the last thing I would probably mention, the second major element I think the Chinese sort of ancient wisdom brings is a certain level of sort of non-attachment. So meaning like you still have the heart open and to have compassion, but not specifically attached to things has to happen in a certain way, right? And this I feel it's really a beautiful sort of manifestation in system thinking theory. Because the thing is, in a complex system or in chaotic situation, in a chaotic system, there's no way that you can actually attach to a certain outcome or a certain result. Yeah. What we do is we nudge and influence to go towards that direction of an intention. Yeah. But actually not really strictly attach. So I think these elements, maybe three then, right? The system thinking, the compassion beyond borders, and the non-attachment could be some areas I would say from the Chinese sort of wisdom culture that could offer to this work.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's actually the first time I relate, let's say, acupuncture with system thinking. But when you said it, it was like, yes, my goodness, I understand it now. Because of course, with acupuncture, it's about, you have a
Yeah,
pressure point here, but the impact happens somewhere else potentially.
yeah,
And I almost felt systems thinking with my body as you were saying that, which I think is a very like beautiful, comparison or
mm,
analogy for systems thinking.
mhm,
And I also, as you were talking, I was thinking, well, of course, if you come from China, like if you're in Lebanon, there's 4 million people, if you, or where I am now, which is the UAE, you can attach yourself to process because it's relatively easy to get 10 million people to behave in one specific way. There are still like, and also the geography is very small.
mhm,
So whether it's Lebanon or the UAE where I currently live, like you can cross the country in 2 hours,
mhm,
Whereas if you come from a place like China, the sheer scale of
mhm.
both the geography and the demography means that you cannot think in that way. It would never work, right?
Yeah.
And it's truly incredible to see how those things kind of make it through into also how we build our own tools
Mm,
for managing and understanding the world. I think it's a really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, and it speaks a lot to me.
mm,
Um, so actually, a question from the audience here, which I think is a good follow up. So you're one kind of person, and you just shared a little bit about us, about yourself with us.
mhm,
A question is, how do you use this kind of thinking with people who might be more practical, more pragmatic, more performance oriented, versus having the conceptual and system thinking approach that you might have?
Great question. Yeah, that's really great question. And I guess the beauty of having a very diverse and inclusive environment is really the key to address this. What I love about my team, the 16 people, is that we are very different people. I mean, maybe in another occasion, I would get some of my colleagues here. We have people on the whole spectrum, like, and the beauty is we share very similar passion. When we talk about the future way of working, about the patient, passion for patients, about TEAL, very similar. We have very similar passion, but we are very diverse in terms of capabilities and way of thinking. And I can just share some experience because I have not really sort of designed it like so kind of specifically like that. But I have an intuition that really allow like when you actually uh, sort of have some work and hire for their passion and mindset, but also make an conscious effort to hire for diversity and create the environment for inclusion. And we often talk about the gardening analogy that we actually are there to foster the soil so that all kinds of flowers and fauna and flora can flourish. and to work with the people who are more process oriented, etc., etc. I guess this really the open heart again, about the open heart and the inclusiveness and the invitation for them to actually contribute in their own way because they are going to be great at processes that I'm not so great at, and we could partner beautifully, right? And yeah, diversity and inclusion, and I guess holding that the soil, holding that system so that all kinds of different personalities can have their place so that they swarm to the passion that they have and the rare areas that they can unleash their potential so that collectively this whole garden can flourish.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I really love this metaphor. I don't know if I shared this with you when we spoke the first time because you talked to me about the garden metaphor. And about a year, yeah, at our first year anniversary as an organization, I invited my personal coach to come and do a session for the team. And the session that she facilitated, she asked us different questions, but one of them was to kind of represent our organization through a visualization. So every different person had either, an environment, an animal, a plant, a being, different things that they were showcasing. And I mean, maybe I can share it at some point, or I'll put it in the comments later for anyone who's curious. But I made a drawing of a plant that had different flowers. So what you're
Oh.
saying really resonates with me. I'll put it later in the comments for you to see. But because to me, it's this gardening metaphor. I feel so strongly about it, right? That as a leader, I'm not the flower, I'm not the plant. My role is to garden, is to create the right soil, to put the plant in the right place, to care for, the sunshine and the water and the environment. Also, sometimes I also talk a lot about this with my team because when we think of plants, we also always think of like growth, but a big part of growing is also pruning, which means to accept sometimes to cut something out, to say, we really shouldn't have gone in this direction. Actually, it's not very good for us as a plant. We need to cut it out to be able to have the courage to do that. And so I feel very strongly about this metaphor. In fact, I have a plant on my desk right here. I gift every centaur a plant because we live in a lot of different places. So I send them a plant every year for Christmas, the same one, so that we all remember actually that we are collectively growing this organic thing that is this organization. Um, and I love that, organization and organic have the same root.
Mm,
Because it's such a, if we don't take care of it, then it withers and it dies, right? And I think that's for me, such a strong metaphor of how to think about organizations. Um, there's another question here from the audience that I'd like to bring in, because you and I agree so much with each other. But I like this question that asks, like, was there a time when this approach was challenging in its application, where it failed or it didn't work? And how did you what did you learn from that, or how did you adapt?
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, there are definitely challenges. I've actually been reflecting, the other day I witnessed a systemic constellation on organizations, and there were the challenge of artificially creating flat structures and the chaos that it created. So like and I started to reflect on what we are doing because we are so passionate about teal and we believe that this is actually a great way of the organizational evolution. And my reflection then is that like what are the natural movement an organization need to have in certain environments you need actually a very very strong leadership and also natural hierarchy. I mean natural, not in the power sense, but actually for the leader to step up. And I think you asked me about you asked about concrete examples. I think I see actually some patterns in the course of self-organizing. The misunderstanding could lead to problems of missing leadership. That we say, okay, we're great, you're all self-organizing, and then then the leaders start to kind of feel confused. What is my role? Or should I just hold back? I don't say what I want to say, and this did happen, and it does happen also now, because 14,000 people, they're very, very different stages, different type of dynamics. And I think the one thing that I'm currently reflecting on and working on is how to support the system to naturally evolve with the clear purpose of benefiting the patient and the triple win that I just mentioned, right? And not artificially forcing TU. If you that's like an inherent contradiction, isn't it? That you force TU into an organization, and that is exactly against the
The
purpose.
opposite of teal.
And
Yeah.
in many leadership theory, actually, when we look at in the OD theory, we I think the researchers looked at different type of organizing, and the least efficient is actually the chaos created by
Yeah.
sort of first missing leadership, unclear principles, unclear guardrails, and that create a lot of overload.
Yeah.
And one topic that I'm working or kind of trying to get more awareness and insights is indeed overload, collaborative overload in and that's also why we work on organizational network analysis in
Yes.
understanding what that might be. So I know that we probably won't have time to dive too deep into this, but I guess in short, this is not a rosy picture for all. And I
Mm,
think and that there are a lot of challenges if we're not really tuned in to what is actually happening. And the more I'm in this work, the more I am getting more curious about the natural system flow. And my Chinese Taoism background, when we sometimes say the Wu Wei principle is like mastering by not doing. And a lot of people say, oh, you're not doing. It's not nothing, but actually do what is the flow, like what's the most natural that needs to happen in the
right.
right moment with the right people in the right place. And that such is such an art that I think we make a lot of mistake about, and we probably create chaos as well.
Yeah,
So
I
constant
I
learning.
fully appreciate that. I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying when I read Frédéric Laroux's book, and understood the concept of teal organizations. It's an incredibly attractive concept for people who do want to be autonomous, independent, have space for creativity, decision making, et cetera, et cetera. And it took me a very long time to realize I mean, maybe for different reasons than you, that actually not everybody wants that. Some people want to be led also, and they find comfort and safety in that. It's not that they're lazy or anything. That different cultures don't actually feel the same way about this at all, right? And that, as you say, it creates such a communication overload, or the opposite of that, which is that information doesn't flow well through the system, because hierarchy is good at something. It's good at like communication, in fact, when it's done well, of course. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I really love the intellectual honesty of saying, like, but does this system also, like, can we make sure that we're aware of the trade-offs and the consequences of every system has good and bad things to it, and that we're thinking about how to manage them
Yeah,
actively.
yeah. And I would say, to work with this, I would actually aspire and nudge the system, the colleagues to have a very clear purpose. And this is also what helps us a lot of the triple win and the patient's benefit, and actually follow the natural system flow.
Yeah.
So at some point, I guess teal in a sense could be embracing. So it does not have to be like ending up with chaos. So in that sense, I feel my learning certainly is getting greater and greater about understanding the natural systems wisdom,
Yeah.
and work with that with a clear purpose.
I love that. I mean, that's such a beautiful way to wrap things up for us today. But I think that, yeah, I mean, in many ways, purpose act like North Star magnets. I mean, you pick the metaphor that you want, but it's beautiful because not every metal will be directed exactly the same way. But on the whole, they're all be going towards the magnet, right? And so
Mhm.
in the end, that's kind of what you want to be able to achieve as a leader in an organization, while maintaining, let's say, individual choice and space for people to explore their own paths along that way. And purposes definitely has come up over and over and over again, in our conversations during the conference, but also in my line of work, as something to truly take the time to explore and establish collectively. And so I think that's a beautiful way to wrap things up. I'm getting a little emotional, like, because this is really like the last conversation of the conference. It's been every day for the past 3 weeks. I've learned so much. So I'm like, I don't want to end this, but also I know that we're getting, close to our 45-minute mark. So I will take us to our rapid fire questions, but I think there's so much more of what you said that I'd love to explore. So we'll see how we'll make that happen in the next, weeks or months. But thank you so much for giving us a lot of food for thought, actually, Breeze. I really appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to take us to our rapid fire questions, if you're ready.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'm going to start a statement and then I want you to finish it. The first one is, great employee experience is
holding the whole system with compassion.
beautiful. The book that every leader should read today.
Reinventing organizations. I would add one. I'm recently reading Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh, yeah, I haven't read that one, but I've heard of it.
Great book.
Excellent. The ideal workplace is
Where we all show up wholeheartedly and can fulfill our potential.
oh, beautiful. And the secret ingredient to a great employee experience is
I would say follow the flow. I don't know if that's too philosophical, but really follow the flow and see and embracing the whole system.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining us, Breeze, and for sharing those insights and perspectives. And I think leaving everybody with, I mean, you call it philosophical, but I call it space to think, sometimes not providing like the very 5 feet, level answers is also a great way to create space for people to reflect on what their own answers would be. And I really appreciate that. And I think this conference has been a beautiful combination of both of those types of conversations, conversations with very tangible, practical advice, which is great because sometimes you just need to know where you start tomorrow, and then other conversations that for me, and I'm sure for the audience, has just created a window in our minds for us to go and look what's there and explore it. And I think this conversation is definitely one of those. I want to take a minute. You're going to have to go through my acknowledgements, but take a minute to thank, again, everybody on the Cosmic Centers team, every single speaker or contributor or guest that we've had over the last 3.5 weeks, every attendee who's shown up and asked questions or even not asked questions. I love lurkers too. I'm a lurker. I'll go and I'll sit and I'll listen and I'll talk about it to everybody around me. I might not just show up in the comments either, but I appreciate everybody who's given us any of their time. We don't take that for granted at all, and we're incredibly grateful for it. And yeah, grateful for the opportunity to be able to have all of these beautiful conversations. Breeze, thank you for being, my companion on this last mission of the Cosmic Conference. And we do look forward to seeing everybody again next year. And on this lovely note, I will sign us out. Thank you.